Scott Neal has been city manager of Edina since 2010 and has more than 30 years experience as a local government chief executive officer. In his current role, he serves on the boards of directors of the Municipal Legislative Commission, the Edina Chamber of Commerce, the Southwest Suburban Cable Commission, the Southwest Metro Public Safety Training Facility. He's the chair of the board. He's also on the board of directors of Explore Edina, the Minnesota City County Managers Association, and the International City County Managers Association. Perry Vetter has been Parks and Rec Director since 2019, and in his role, he oversees programming, park maintenance and forestry, recreation enterprises, and Edina liquor operations. Before he came to Edina, he served as the Assistant City Manager and Director of Administrative Services for the City of Minnetonka. Welcome, Manager Neal and Perry Vetter. We're looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Joni. And my best credential, I think, this morning is that Joni Bennett helped hire me and bring me to Edina, which changed the trajectory of my life forever. So thanks, Joni. Still appreciate that. All right, Perry is driving the presentation this morning, so let's get started. We have given this presentation a few times. What we're going to talk about today, what we're going to talk about today is educational. Our intention is to educate, not advocate. We have Perry and I are both public employees, and we are barred from doing advocacy on issues like this. So this issue, the local option sales tax issue, is an issue that is brought to Edina citizens, and they are the only ones that can resolve whether or not the city is going to have a local option sales tax for whatever purpose. And we'll get into a little bit more later here about the tax, how it works, and what it's applied to, et cetera. So let's move on, Perry. So our Parks and Rec system, for the people that live in Edina, is one of their most cherished assets, public assets. It's our job as city government to try to keep it in the best shape possible, not just from a maintenance standpoint, but from a system standpoint too. We want to make sure that our Parks and Rec system keeps up with contemporary needs. We have developed in that regard a $64 million investment plan for not only maintenance needs, but also development needs for our system, primarily at Braemar Park and Fred Richards Park. That $64 million investment plan has at its key a funding vehicle called local option sales tax, and that's what's going to be presented to voters. Well, it's part of early voting now, but will be determined by Edina voters on November 8th. One detail from the previous slide that I should have referenced a bit more is that while we have a $64 million plan, our proposals that we're presenting to residents this fall total $39.3 million, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's the difference between 39 and 64. All right, Barry. So again, we've had community growth. Our system needs to adapt. When you think about 10 years ago, we weren't playing much in the way of pickleball 10 years ago, and pickleball is really a strong demand on our system right now, and Parks and Rec systems across the country. So that's we see some youth sports getting more popular, others getting less popular. It's important to have a well-rounded Park and Rec system so that we can have opportunities to play for everyone, but we also want to make sure that our system keeps up and is in good shape. Next. So over the past decade, really, and more particularly the last 5 or 6 years, we have been working on. Can we go back one more, Perry? Other way. Yeah, right there. We have been working on developing this plan. We've had a lot of of resident involvement in creating a master plan for Fred Richards Park and a new master plan for Braemar Park, both of which really the resident engagement was key in making plans that are both acceptable and enjoyable for the neighborhood and for the community itself. When we think about how to fund the funding vehicles for these projects, there really aren't too many opportunities available to us. The biggest and most conventional of which is property taxes, and we spent a fair amount of time talking both at the staff level and at the council level about how do we want to be good stewards of our property tax levy. Are there alternative revenue streams that we could look at for large park and rec or large amenity kind of investments? And so that's where we explored the local option sales tax. In Minnesota, for a community to have a local option sales tax, the first step is to go to the city council and get them to adopt a resolution requesting a referendum. That resolution then is transmitted to the state legislature, where it ultimately goes through both the House Tax Committee and the Senate Tax Committee. It's produced into a law, a special law that talks about not only how much money the city can try to gain from local option sales tax, but what projects are included. So when we made our presentation to the legislature, we had to be able to justify that our projects had a regional nature to them. So Braemar Park, that's not a problem. The Fred Richards Park, they believed had regional implications to it, but we also presented the Weber Woods Park, Morningside Park project that's going on right now, and we were trying to make a case for that to be considered a regional project, and they did not. They did not approve that. So that's why those projects were included or are included on the ballot for this fall, and other projects aren't, because smaller neighborhood parks do not have a regional attraction to them. So because of that, they were not included. The other big project that we spent a lot of time in the last session on earlier this year is the expansion of Braemar Arena. That was a $25.3 million expansion, and it was going to be part of our overall local option sales tax referendum. However, that piece of the referendum got tangled in kind of the end of session politics at the legislature. It was in the tax bill, but the tax bill did not make it out of conference committee, did not become law. So that is not part of the referendum for this fall. But we've talked a lot about it, and we do still have that as part of our future park and rec investment plan. All right, Perry, I think you got the next couple of slides.
I do. Thank you, everyone, and good morning, and thanks for having me. When I'm not speaking, I'll put my microphone on mute whenever there's heavy truck traffic on 50th. It seems to pick up the truck traffic and not me, so I'll do my best to balance. Wanted to talk in a continuation of Scott's introduction and scope of what is on the ballot, and that's just specifically what these projects entail and a little bit about how they came to fruition. And the first is the Fred Richards Park and Fred Richards Master Plan. As many of you know, the Fred Richards Golf Course did close in 2014, and that began a process to develop a community-driven master plan for Fred Richards Park. It's one of the last untouched gems that we have for available park and recreation use in Edina. It's 43 acres. And the master plan culminated in city council adoption in 2017. So it's been waiting for a funding mechanism since that date. And it's really repurposing that site into that community park and recreation feel. It includes new trails, not just the main trail that has a ribbon through Fred Richards Park. If you've been there, that's part of the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District Trail, but also additional trails and accessory trails for walking around into the park. And kind of what we see a lot of use is kind of those keynote trail uses where people in the neighborhood kind of start, they make that nice loop and they come back to their beginning or end point destination. So new trails. The second is, as Scott referred to is just the expansion and interest in pickleball, not only in the United States as a whole, in Minnesota as a whole, but in Edina. And we are blessed with the 5 courts at Roslyn Park, the Moody pickleball courts. If you've ever driven by on Crosstown and seen the backlog of parking and waiting, we are in desperate need of additional pickleball courts. The Fred Richards Park actually includes an additional 8 pickleball courts. It does include a basketball court and a number of other exercise and educational pieces that are kind of in that passive recreation piece where you can go and enjoy. It might be bags or horseshoes or just your general exercise ability that you want to recreate kind of around where the existing clubhouse is. Another massive portion of this project is natural resource restoration. And that's the creation of 10 acres of wetland. And for those of you that are familiar with the Weber Woods Flood Reduction Task Force, this area in Southeast Edina also has a need for flood reduction. And this park can accommodate 10 acres of wetland creation, as well as additional flood reduction or flood protection area. And that would be a massive part of this. So there's a balance between active, passive, and natural resource recreational aspects in here. It includes an inclusive playground. And I wanted to spend just a moment on what inclusive playgrounds are. For those of you that are familiar with the Roslyn Park playground, we look at that as our accessible, barrier-free playground. That was a massive endeavor that occurred in 2016 to create that barrier-free playground. It removed, for anyone that has a physical or mobility limit to their child or an adult that wants to recreate on that area, it removed things. So a traditional playground, a child may be able to wheel up to it and transition and play on a certain number of amenities. The one at Roslyn includes all of those amenities. So that's a little bit different than what we call inclusive. And inclusive, for those of you that are familiar, a playground would help assist children and adults that have more of the sensory needs. Think of children that have Asperger's or autism. And what we want to do is create an environment where they have the ability to play with other children, play with their peers, but also at times when they need to self-remove themselves because things might be a little bit more overwhelming, there are areas where they can play as individuals and work through that and then possibly rejoin their group, but still have the ability to recreate with their peers, but also provide them the support that they do. We've been in talks with representatives from Children's Hospital Network, and they are actually working on these types of things, and they would help provide that guidance to this if this were to come to fruition. It includes a pavilion. There would be a renovation to the existing clubhouse. There would be a food and beverage operation. Now, we've not got into design details on that aspect of it yet, because as you know, there's been a lot of upheaval and change in that food and restaurant component since the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we thought maybe could have occurred in 2018 might not be what we end up with in the end. So it does include a food and beverage component of it, which would act as an enterprise for that operation. But we just haven't gotten into that because of just, it's a little too unknown at this point with where we are on implementing that aspect of it. It also includes a great lawn, just an area of a nice open area where families, kids can just recreate on a great lawn. And that's a little bit unique in Edina because it's not going to be a sports field per se, right? This isn't something that's going to be lit with athletic lights that every time you go there, there might be a practice or a game going on. This would be specifically for families to come, fly that kite, play catch, just enjoy the outdoors. In addition, it would also function in the winter because we're looking more of year-round recreation at both of these areas as well. So there would be aspects to the ability to go snowshoe, to play in the winter and have an opportunity in that sense. Also includes things like new lighting, seating, signs, infrastructure, and parking and access, which would come off of 77th Street. I think the hardest part about getting to Frederick right now is just the access and finding your to navigate a way into that. And with a new entrance off of 77th, that would help solve that. The next up is Braemar Park and Braemar Arena. So the first part of the park is, this was also a community-driven master plan. That started in 2018 was adopted by the city council at that time. it has kind of three main portions, and that's the first is kind of a theme, the trail system. And we always hear, in addition to Fred Richards and Braemar, the overwhelming need for additional trails and walking in the community. So Braemar Park would have a walking system, not only off of Hillerly Lane, kind of a separated trail system to make people a little bit safer with vehicle traffic, but also ability to walk into the natural areas that were not used by the golf course renovation a number of years ago. It would also have a winter component with expanded cross-country ski and snowshoeing trails. Now, that would have to be natural snow. There is no accommodation for artificial snow in this plan, but it would be an additional winter use, as well as for mountain biking in some of those natural areas as well. And that is also a large growing sport as well in recreational activity. A lot of people are turning to that because they just don't feel safe biking on roads anymore. And this allows them to get off of a road and into a new sport. Near the Courtney Field complex, which is just adjacent to where the sports dome goes up, there would be a new playground installed. Braemar Park is still considered one of our parks. It's our largest at 500 acres. It actually services a large area of residents in that southwest quadrant, and it doesn't have a playground for anyone in the neighborhood. So adding that, also, as we talked about, kind of that theme of pickleball courts and platform tennis, that would be a little bit closer to the golf course. And then upgrades to the baseball complex, thinking lighting, irrigation, kind of the sub infrastructure items that are aging and that we have to maintain. One of the biggest components that would have a large benefit is restored natural areas. If you drive anywhere in and around that area, you'll see signs of the impacts that we've had over the last several years because of drought, because of inundation of stormwater. There's areas where things were very, very dry. A lot of those trees got stressed. And then for a number of years, they were very, very wet and they were underwater. We've had high tree mortality in that area. As well as you look up into the uplands, you'll see just very, very majestic oaks. And I would say if you look close enough, because the amount of buckthorn and garlic mustard that is inundating that area, you're starting to see that if we don't kind of work on the stewardship of that area, you're going to end up with a very heavy monoculture. And we won't have any of that regeneration of those oaks, as well as improved parking in that area. The second piece of that is then updates to Braemar Arena. As you know, one of our largest community recreational facilities that we see visitors attend is in dire need of things that kind of help operate that system. HVAC systems, roofing, energy efficiency, accessibility in our locker rooms, in our restrooms, helping with our rink surfaces. We have the East Arena, because of what's called permafrost. I don't know how many are familiar with it, but because we keep cooling, we're sending frost deeper and deeper into the ground. And it's roughly between 15 and 20 feet deep, the frost level. And what it's doing is actually, if any of you have dealt with frost on your sidewalk or anywhere in your home, it's actually pushing up one side of the arena and not the other. So our East Arena, while we shave the ice level, is actually very thin on one end and very thick on the other. So that does create a lot of management aspects of how we maintain the ice because of that permafrost. And as Scott mentioned, the last piece of this, which is not on the ballot, but is part of our overall vision, is the expansion of Braemar Arena. We were approached by members of the skating and hockey community about their concern where they have so many users, but not enough hours in the day for ice. And what would it look like to expand the arena? And as I've always kind of said through these presentations, you can never have enough ice arenas in Minnesota, and especially Edina, from December through the end of February. You'll never have enough from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. But what about that Tuesday in June, that Saturday in May? What about that? How would we manage from a fiscal and management standpoint about that need? So we actually did a study on that, and we used an independent consultant that deals with recreation management and recreation facilities and had them look at it. And they interviewed our stakeholders and they looked at our revenues and expenses. And actually a fourth sheet of ice actually helps our city budget, the arena budget, operate in a more efficient way, and it provides additional ice time to the community. And the community is interested in that because a lot of times now they're driving to Augsburg, or they take all of Bloomington, anything they can get in Bloomington or into Lakeville. So they're trying to gobble up any ice they can. The Edina Hockey Association right now, of all the ice they rent, roughly about 50% of that is actually only from Braemar Arena. They're actually getting the other half of their ice that they need outside of us. So, but as Scott mentioned, that didn't get through the legislative session and is not part of the ballot question this year. One piece that I did want to mention as well is, while we're kind of going through this fairly quickly today, is that we actually did specific Better Together Edina Town Talks on each of these projects. So if you are looking for particulars, there'll be a website at the end of this presentation where you can connect back, but we've done a detailed presentation on all of Fred Richards and all of Braemar Park and the arena upgrades, as well as our finance director, Alicia McAndrews, did a presentation on the local action sales tax mechanics. And as Scott mentioned, we do have other park needs. We have other park wants, other park needs, but these were the projects that are eligible for this type of funding. And that's why you're only seeing these as was mentioned earlier. Scott, did you want me to keep going, or did you want to go on this one? And you're muted.
Sorry, you do this slide and then I take it from there.
All right, thanks. Okay, so how this would function and work. So if approved, the total cost of the investments for these would be funded by 0.5% sales tax increase over no more than 19 years. And the city council concluded that that option was the best choice because it's spread among residents and non-residents. And I think that's a unique piece that we have on these, is because when you think of, say, Braemar Arena, not only does, we have our core stakeholders that rent the ice from us, but we have roughly 158 other communities in Minnesota alone that come to Braemar Arena. We also have participants come from what we've studied, 12 additional states and one other country in Canada. And the issue of capturing that resident versus non-resident is a challenge for us, because say there's the Braemar Lakes Figure Skating Club has an event. Well, they are renting the ice from us, and they're paying that local rate. If the Edina Hockey Association is renting the ice for a tournament, they're paying their rate. We don't have a rate whether Edina plays St. Louis Park or Edina plays Thief River Falls or Edina plays a team from Texas. So that's why when you look at that resident, non-resident, the local option sales tax, that's where that regional component comes in, about those groups coming into town and participating in our facilities there. If the projects were funded through a property tax increase versus a sales tax, then that would be 100% Edina residents. So it's a way to not just say, oh, non-residents can pay, but actually non-residents are using in these areas, so they can also assist towards these projects.
We've talked already about why a local option sales tax. Perry just addressed that. In terms of these facilities having a regional footprint, we feel it's appropriate for the funding vehicle to also have a regional footprint as well, and that's why the sales tax links to regional projects. And we had the University of Minnesota has, for a couple of times now, has done some financial forecasting for us with regards to a local option sales tax, because we needed to have some understanding about how much money it would create in order to look at some of the other fiscal constraints and parameters for us. Their estimate is that 54% of the 0.5% sales tax would be paid for by non-residents. That breaks down a lot of different ways into classes of retail goods as well. So we've got a lot of data on this by care of the University of Minnesota Extension Service. And those reports, if you want to take a deeper look at them, are available at edinaatplay.org, the website that Perry talked about earlier. So non-residents would contribute $35 million, in our forecast of all of the $64 million should we be able to go forward with the entire project. But they will contribute 54% of the 39 million, the projects that are on the referendum, that are part of the referendum this fall. Next. One of the most confusing questions or aspects of the sales tax referendum is this, what we're about to talk about. And the legislature not only has input on how much money we can derive from this revenue source, what we spend it on, but they also had to approve they gave us the language that we have to put on our ballot for this fall. So maybe some of you have already encountered this language, but the language really separates these two projects into two separate questions, both with a yes or a no, right? And the yes and no are referring to whether or not you believe that the local option sales tax should be imposed for these projects. So you can say yes and yes to both projects. You can say yes to one and no to the other. You can say no to both. But in any case, the local option sales tax that we can impose is no greater than 0.5%. So part of what we have had trouble explaining is if you vote for 0.5% local option sales tax on the Fred Richards projects and 0.5% on the Braemar projects, does 0.5 plus 0.5 equal 1? It does not. It's still the 1/2 of 1%. Really, what we're looking at there is that is probably for how long it's going to impact the length or the duration of the tax itself. So we expect by the forecasting from the University of Minnesota that we will collect somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.1 to $4.2 million a year in new revenue. That new revenue is what we will use to pay any debt service that we take on to do these large capital projects. If we expect to collect $4 million a year, we have 19 years of capacity. That was part of the law as well. So 19 times 4 is in the $70 million range. Our projects that are on the ballot this year are for $39 million. So we believe, given expected rate of collection, that we will have a sales tax in play, if nothing else happens, for somewhere between 10 and 12 years. That depends, of course, on the economy. It depends on inflation. It depends on how the sales tax is collected and dispersed to us. But under current law, under current economic conditions, that's what we're looking at here. Perry? So if the referendum passes, we've got a lot of work to do. We have to take a look at design and engineering work. We would want to get that work happening as soon as we can in 2023. I mean, one of the things that happens when you have a referendum like this is if it passes, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of expectations about, hey, when are those projects going to be completed? So we would get to work on those planning and design and engineering aspects right away in 2023. If the referendum does not pass, we've also got a lot of work to do because we've got some major capital improvements out there with really very limited options in terms of financing them. So we might go back to our council and ask them where this project or where these projects that we've been talking about for a long time, where do they stand in terms of the larger capital funding priorities of the city? And we would look at other alternative funding streams for them. But that's, in either case, we've got a lot of work to do. One in which we are building things and the other in which we are planning things. So on our website, edina@play.org, this is a special microsite that we put together explicitly for this purpose, is to provide information for people to make a thoughtful decision on how they want to vote on this referendum. It includes the master plans for both Braemar Park and Fred Richards Park. It includes costs and tax impacts that we talked about a little bit ago from the University of Minnesota in looking at our sales tax, voter information about where to vote. We try to answer as many questions as we get from folks about this site as well. And so there's an FAQ there where we're answering questions. And you know, every day from here on out is election day almost, but the end of the election cycle is Tuesday, November 8th. Voting has already begun. It's been at a pretty robust pace. That's what I hear from our city clerk. So we hope everyone will vote, and we're happy to answer questions now from anyone. Thank you.
Say thank you. Joni, I know we got some questions from you last evening. I don't know if you'd like us to just start with those, or.
Yes, please. That's a good place to start.
And I can handle the first question.
And then I'll do the second two, Perry.
Yeah.
Just so
And
folks know, these were questions that were submitted in advance by someone attending today. So we'll start with those, but then please just raise your hand when you have a question.
Sure.
So one of the first questions we got is, how will user fees be changed to fund Braemar and Fred Richards Park? And we do review user fees every year, and that gets adopted by a council resolution. And typically our association fees continually go up. And that's the amount that we charge for certain activities. And it may be for the soccer association renting a field. And when it comes to Braemar Arena, it's specifically for what do we charge per hour of ice. In addition to that, the users of Braemar, all of our youth associations pay a per participant fee. So no matter if they have 400 youth in their association or 2,000 in their association, they pay a per participant fee. In addition, the figure skating club and Braemar Arena pay an additional $20 per person or per participant fee per season. So ice time does go up. It's currently $255 per hour. And we always try to balance the ability to provide access to a facility with how much we can recapture. And I don't know how many folks know this, but by design, the Braemar Arena budget does operate at a loss, and it's made up for by profits from the Edina liquor operations. So that is one of that mechanism we try to find between providing access, keeping fees reasonable, and then not impacting property taxpayers. So fees continually go up, and those are reviewed every year based on inflation, costs, those types of things. When it comes to Fred Richards, we probably would have two ways to capture fees, and that would be one, if we did any sort of concessionaire food and beverage operations like we want to do, and then on the ability to look at the wetland components. And that would be a future decision for the council to say is, you know, do we want to sell and bank wetland credits? That would be an opportunity to gain revenue for the park, or could offset costs. If this referendum isn't successful, we probably have to look at other ways to do that. We would also look to bring in other partners on some of these components to also help alleviate costs for future operating. That was a very successful operation at Arden Park by bringing in Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for Fred Richards. The 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, which is within that district, is interested, as well as Hennepin County for their water management area. So we have a number of ways to try to capture some of the costs, some of the future operating, as well as the continued balance of charging people for their use with access to the facility. You know, we do have concerns about how much more we can charge at Braemar because of, you know, some of the logistical pieces we have with its infrastructure of continuing to provide good value for what people are paying. We are on kind of the high end of what arenas do charge.
The second question was, how will the sales tax increase affect Edina retailers, and what feedback have we heard from them? The sales tax, the impact of the sales tax for them really comes back to probably certainly reprogramming their point of sale equipment, their cash registers, that sort of thing. So that does have that has a tangible impact on them for sure. This half-cent local option sales tax would increase the sales tax paid in Edina to be equal to that has been in play in Minneapolis for decades. So in terms of a competitive environment, at least for one of our neighbors, it would match us up with them. One of the things that I have heard from other city governments in my profession is that a half-cent local option sales tax doesn't tend to have much of an impact on consumer purchase decisions at all. A 1%, however, does, and cities in cities and states like Colorado, where they are heavily dependent on sales taxes for local park and rec amenity programs funding, that has been a big issue there. So a half-cent local option sales tax doesn't have that same kind of relocation decision for consumer decisions. That's our understanding. And what feedback have we had? Very little feedback. I think I've had a feedback from a car dealer that wanted to know whether this impacted them. It does not. You pay a lot of taxes when you buy a car, but sales tax is not one of them. The sales tax, the local option sales tax, is applied to all the same purchases that are currently applied to sales tax. So if you pay sales tax on a purchase right now, the local option sales tax would impact that decision. If it's exempt from sales tax right now, it is also exempt from sales tax. We have had a discussion with the Edina Chamber of Commerce. So, talking to a group that acts as a proxy for local retailers. We had a good discussion with them about the impact on retail and business in general. They have endorsed a positive or an affirmative vote on the referendum for this fall, and they've expressed that publicly a couple of times. The third question is, can you share any projections that these projects will increase development and cause increased property tax receipts? What is the range of potential increased values and tax receipts? I don't think we have any projections about how local option sales tax might increase the value of properties around an investment. So I guess the best example would be the Fred Richards Park. We're proposing a pretty significant investment in that park. I would guess that it will have a positive impact on the value of the Pentagon Park property that surrounds it, but we don't have any studies or estimates about what that would be. Joni, do you want us to just respond to people with their hands up, or do you want to control that part?
Unmuting, there we go.
Okay.
So I am, if you can see hands, sure. I think one of the advantages of the Zoom meeting is everybody has an electric name tag.
Yeah. Okay, David? I think that's your hand.
Yeah, I just unmuted. I'd asked 3 questions at the beginning of this. One of them had to do with a trail along Meadowbrook Lake. Now, I guess these sorts of things under this tax guidance, something like that wouldn't see any kind of investment from the state, because it may or may not be regional. But that putting a trail up across Meadowbrook Lake would join up with the trails up there around the Southwest Light Rail as well. I'm not sure about this end, but it would seem like something like that would be something to consider. Also, maybe improvements down in Bredesen. I talk about these things are up where I live, and I'm up in the northwest part of town. I noticed that the investments that are part of this tax investment are kind of weighted to the south part of town. And I'm thinking that if people up here had ideas about improvements, then I think that what we'd be seeing is a much longer extension of this tax, and that may not be favorable because of the length of time.
I think there will be a fair amount of push and pull on what we can spend the new revenue on. Our understanding of state law in this regard is that we have to be very we have to be very tight in which we manage the expenditure of the money on the questions that were actually approved by Edina residents. So when you are asked to vote on the Fred Richards Park, specifically, you're being asked to vote for us to implement the Fred Richards Park Master Plan. That Fred Richards Park Master Plan is a document. It's got a lot of different improvements in it, and that's the list of projects that we will spend this money on. The projects you're talking about, David, are still projects in our system that we should consider, but it would be through a separate process that we would do that.
I see that Arnie has a hand up.
I do, and living in the far southeast reaches of the community, I just look at all of these projects wherever they are. And I'm not a hockey player. I had two daughters, didn't have any hockey players in my family when they were growing up. But I think this is just a great investment in a portion of our city economy that really not only serves the residents here, but also serves as a gathering point for a lot of other communities that don't have these resources, aren't big enough to have them, and kind of puts us on the map as a place to be and to go to for these kinds of services. So I'm enthusiastic about this. I live in a condominium. I'm not going to be out there on the skating rinks at all at my age, but I think it's a good investment for our future in this community. And yeah, thank you.
Looking for hands. Are there any other questions today?
You know where
Mary
to
Beth?
find? Oh, okay.
Mary Beth, you need to unmute.
Yep, sorry. I live in Centennial Lakes Village Homes, and we pay a park fee. Yeah, all of the residents do, and it supposedly we will finally be done with it in about 9 years. And I'm in favor of this project, and it's not going to cost that much money, but I just want to make the statement that I feel like I am paying 3 times for park fees. And we pay in our property taxes, we pay this park fee, and now I'm going to vote for an increase in sales tax and triple paying for parks. I just don't think that's very fair. And that I wish that they would put more of the park budget in the general budget so that everybody in Edina is paying for Centennial Lakes Park, because trust me, everybody in Edina is using Centennial Lakes Park. And I don't think there's another park in the city that is paying, that residents are paying a park fee to live on the perimeter of that park. Like you're saying that this is really going to increase property values for people. It could increase property values for people that live around Fred Richards. So their property values will go up. Our property values go up all the time. And we're still paying a park fee for this luxury of living on the park. So I just want to make that statement. And is there, I mean, was there any talk about including this, including putting the park budget in the general budget instead of having a separate park budget for each? Well, anyway, you know my concern.
I do. And you're not wrong. Have we had a discussion about putting the Centennial Lakes Park budget into the general fund budget? We have had some discussion. We have consciously decided not to. But that is a decision that it can be revisited by local officials. It's not mandated by the state or anybody else.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Any other hands? Any other questions?
It's Arnie again. Got my hand up.
Okay,
I also live in Village Homes here in Edina. I just want to ask if the park fees that we have on our association fees are focused at all of the, Centennial Lakes and our surrounding, or if there's also a focus through that on the indoor park at the center out here,
Edinburgh.
So which is it, all both, or is that primarily on the indoor facilities?
So I think I'm hearing the question correct is the associations that use our indoor facilities do indoor and outdoor pay per participant fees just on the number of people they have. Then they also pay for access to those facilities. And Edinburgh Park, we do have one association. It's the Edina Swim Club Association that utilizes that, and they pay that fee, and then they also pay access to that. But just Edinburgh Park in itself, then any visitors to that facility then also pay an admission fee, or people can buy memberships to that site.
But Perry, I think he's asking too, do we use park fees to help support capital projects inside Edinburgh Park?
So we would capture those fees and then use them back within.
Yeah,
So
that's what I thought.
the fees we collect at Edinburgh, we try to then reinvest at Edinburgh, or the fees
Right.
we collect at the golf course, we reinvest at the golf course.
Right.
If I'm hearing it correct.
this might be a really good opportunity for just a little bit of budgeting 101 and going back to explaining what the difference between sort of the general funding of parks through property taxes, neighborhood parks, for instance, and enterprises.
Okay.
And I know this topic well, but I think others may not know it as well.
You do know it well. I think one of the very unique things about Centennial Lakes Park, and Mary Beth has noted it, is that when it was built with this idea that residents who live in the park, adjacent to park facilities, would pay a special fee, park management fee, over and above their property taxes that went specifically to the operating costs of maintaining the park that they live on, right? So that was part of the deal about living there from the very beginning. The developers, of course, who did the development around Centennial Lakes Park agreed to that, and it's been in place ever since. There is an expiration date coming up for a number of those fees. They're a little different in each phase of the Centennial Lakes development, but I'd say most of those development fees are scheduled to go away in the early 2030s, as I remember right. But those fees all go to support Centennial Lakes Park and the people that work there and maintain it on a daily basis, and the projects that you see being built there. other revenue streams from the park when we rent out the facility, boat rental, golf, skating. What else, Perry? What am I thinking about?
Concerts, concessions, kind of like you
Yeah.
said, the putting course.
Anything that has a revenue stream that happens in Centennial Lakes Park, we want to accumulate those monies for the benefit of St. Louis, excuse me, for the benefit of St. Louis Park. No, we don't. For the benefit of Centennial Lakes Park. And even when we do that, we don't quite collect enough to pay the annual operating costs of Centennial Lakes Park. So when that happens, we need to bring in additional money to help close that gap. And that money comes from our liquor profits, our liquor fund. And that generally is used to kind of balance the budget in Centennial Lakes Park. So they are a standalone park. They have a standalone park fees. They have standalone park budgets. Unlike Lewis Park, Pamela Park, Arden Park, those sorts of parks are included in our general fund, and they don't have fees for people that live, special fees that apply to the people that live around those parks.
So, and backing up again, still, so what are examples of other city enterprises?
Certainly Edinburgh Park, we manage like this as well. The Art Center, the Aquatic Center, the Ice Arena, the South Metro Public Safety Training Facility,
Braemar Field and Dome.
Braemar Field and Dome, I think we said the golf course. Those are other facilities that we call recreation enterprises, and we try to operate them as standalone budgets, almost standalone business units. When Joni was on the city council, it was pretty common for us to lose $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 a year at the golf course. We've been able to turn that around in the last couple of years so that has a positive revenue stream to it. Our aquatic center has always had a positive revenue stream associated with it. But our art center has not. What else, Perry, would we say has not? The Edinburgh Park has not. Those are all some parks that generally don't raise enough of money associated with park fees at those facilities to pay all the bills there.
People may recall some fairly significant changes that were made in order to reduce expenses at some of the enterprises. There was a shift in who got the revenue from the concessions at Braemar Arena, for instance, so that the city got those revenues directly. Also from the Dasher Board
Right.
advertising. There were dramatic changes made at Edinburgh in terms of the plantings, the lighting, et cetera, in order to reduce expenses. But just a little bit from memory. And I think you all, Perry and Scott, you provided a document that we tried to see if we could get linked to from the chat. We were unable to do that in advance, but we can send it out by email to the folks who've attended today. It's a PDF, couple pages explanation about a little bit more about this.
Good.
So if people are interested, we can definitely send that out.
Thank you. We'd appreciate that.
All right. Any other questions today? Questions or comments? And I think LEAD does study issues and take positions on them. We have not studied this. We're presenting this in terms of under our umbrella of voter education, but this is not a ballot question on which the league has a position. So we encourage everybody to learn as much as they can and go to the ballot, go to the voting booth informed. Do I see any other hands or questions? Mary Beth.
I'm back to park fees, but the promenade that's been built and is an extension of Centennial Lakes Village Homes, which I think cost over $1 million, and it's beautiful. And I love having, I think everyone likes the beautiful walkway there. But the Edina has continued to build large apartment complexes that access that promenade. And it's my understanding that are those developers or the residents in the owners of those new buildings paying any park fees? Because they are benefiting from living on the park just as we are.
So let's just look at the new units that are built behind Byerly's. I think that's what
Right,
you're talking
71
about.
France, 71
Right,
France.
71
and the
France.
new And the new high rise right on Hazelton and behind Target, the
Right.
lovely, yeah, go ahead.
So we have the ability under certain circumstances to charge a park improvement fee, Perry, a park dedication fee, right?
Dedication.
Dedication fee. In the case of the Byerly's development, we were able to charge a park dedication fee of $5,000 per unit that was built there. So that was
Oh,
paid.
that's good to know.
That was paid up front when they did that development, and we used almost all of that money to do that promenade extension that you see there.
Okay, that's
right?
good to know.
When the Loden was built, do you know, Mary Beth, where the Loden is, the Loden apartment building? It's
That doesn't sound familiar.
yeah, it's a long ways from Centennial Lakes Park, but I'll tell you why it's important. When that apartment building was built, it's out at Bren and 169. We were also
Oh.
able to charge them a park improvement fee, and they paid it, and we used that money to replace both of the bridges in Centennial Lakes Park. So that's
Okay.
how those bridges got replaced, by bringing
Okay.
money from that project there. Unfortunately, state law doesn't allow us to charge those park dedication fees in all cases. And so with the case of the Bauer residents, the
Yeah.
large tower, we were not able to charge them a park dedication fee when they built their project there. We also are not able anymore to do the same kind of maintenance, park maintenance fee agreements with new properties like we have with your property. So we just don't have state statute to support that. Laws have changed a lot since the late 80s and early 90s when Centennial Lakes Park was built. In fact, most of Centennial Lakes Park, all of Centennial Lakes Park was built using tax increment financing. We
Right.
can't use tax increment financing to build parks anymore. If we could, it would be a lot of fun for everybody, but we can't do that anymore. The laws around that have tightened pretty significantly. And that's why there's a difference in how current property owners are treated as opposed to longer term property owners. You should have me back, and I can do a whole discussion around that, Joni, around property tax and maintenance fees and what kind of excess fees that we charge on utilities and things like that. We'd be happy to do that.
So Scott, what determines whether or not a new development is subject to park dedication fees?
An important factor is whether the owner has to subdivide the property. If the owner has to subdivide the property in order for that property to be developed, we then have the ability to charge them that park dedication fee. And that's exactly what happened in the Byerly's case. So they subdivided, they had the 8-acre square. Remember they had the 8-acre parcel and the grocery store right in the middle of it. When they developed, when they did their redevelopment and pushed the grocery store up into the corner of their parcel, they sold off the other pieces of it that became 71 France to another owner. So they had to subdivide the property in order to sell the parcels where the apartments were being built. That's why the subdivision happened, and that's why we got to charge them $5,000 a unit. So it was like a little over $1 million. In the case of the Bauer residence, that was built entirely upon the old Guitar Center site. So they didn't subdivide that, didn't have to subdivide it. And because of that, they were not subject to the park dedication fee.
I'm looking again for hands. Any other questions occur to people? David.
So as I understand it, the park dedication fee for the apartment, which is up in the northwest part of Edina, where I live, was spent down in the southeast part of Edina.
Yes.
So the use is not, the use of the park dedication fees where they can be charged is not geographically confined to the near area to the project?
I think we like to connect the use to the geographic location, but there isn't statute that requires that. There's statutory limitations about what you can spend the money on. It has to be capital improvements. So, but not on a geographic connection.
And I think if I recall correctly, fees from the waters at what's now Meeting House Church were used for the new shelter at Countryside Park.
That's right. So that's a great example of a development that happened and just literally across the street. The money was used to help develop the park or make park improvements for that neighborhood. And when we can do that, that's the best circumstances.
Okay, looking again for more questions. Anybody?
Thank you for having us today. We appreciate your time and your questions.
Well, thank you very much for helping us get a better understanding of something that's being voted on right now and that people will be voting on. Appreciate it very much. Again, people can check the chat for the reference and then Better Together Edina for past presentations, more information. And I think you mentioned one other site, Scott. What was that?
Oh, edina@play.org. Yep.
Okay.
It's a special microsite that is exclusive content for all of what we've been talking about today.
Great. Well, thank you again. Encourage people to come out and hear Max Halperin this evening and hope to see folks also in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank
Nice to
you.
meet you.
Bye-bye.